All right, we should be looking at page 9 at this point for a first day of school introduction to the periodic table. This is some stuff you should already know from middle school, but you probably don't remember it, so we're going to go back over it. Hey, have you ever noticed what the periodic table can tell you? It can tell you the names of all the elements. We're going to talk more exactly about what an element is on a different day. We'll talk about it a little bit today, but more later. The periodic table can also tell you the symbols of all the elements. These are special abbreviations. Each element has its own symbol. The periodic table can also tell you lots of other things that we're going to spend the entire year talking about one by one. Woo! It's very exciting. We're going to try a few. I want you to find the symbols for all of these elements on your periodic table. You'll notice the back cover of your book is a periodic table. So go ahead and find carbon, calcium, chlorine, cesium, chromium, cadmium, cerium, californium. Someone can pause the video right now, and y'all can take 5 minutes at most, 3 minutes. Take 3 minutes, find these symbols on your periodic table. Ready? Pause. Go. You should be paused right now. Okay, and then you unpaused the video and you watched me write the correct answers in here. And let's talk about what you found. You may notice that these above elements have different symbols. All of these elements start with the letter C, but we found different ways to abbreviate them so that each element could still have its own symbol. This way, if I say the element Ca, you know there's only one possible element I could be talking about. Tell me again, which element is that? Ca? Which element? Bingo, it's calcium. You're right. You may also notice that those above elements have symbols that make sense based on the spellings of their names. All those elements start with the letter C, and if the symbol has a second letter, then that letter is also somewhere in the spelling of the element's name, like Ca, calcium has a C and an A. Cl for chlorine, there's a C and an L in there. Cf for californium, there's a C and an F in there. But not every element symbol is an abbreviation of its name that makes sense. For instance, flip to the back of your book, look at element number 29 on the periodic table. I'll give you a moment. Element 29. Did you find it? What is its name? Element 29 is copper with a symbol of Cu. That's pretty weird. Its name is copper, and its symbol is Cu. But that's really strange because the word copper does not have a U in it, so why would its symbol be Cu? Well, some element symbols are based on the spelling of that element's name in different languages. In Latin, copper is called cuprous, C-U-P-R-O-U-S. So in Latin, the symbol Cu still makes sense. Turn the page. We're on page 10 now. There are lots of elements on the periodic table that have symbols that don't match their names in English. And it's time for a scavenger hunt. Let's see how many you can find. And let's see who can find the most in the class. At this time, pause the video and list the elements you can find that have symbols that don't match the way their names are spelled. I already put copper down for you. See if you can find at least 20. There are more than 20. See how many you can find. Let's pause the video. Okay, and when you have unpaused it, you can go ahead and have a class discussion about what are all the ones you found with Miss Woodlock. See how many different ones you guys came up with. And when you're done having that discussion, again, you can pause the video while you have that discussion. And then let's turn the page. So your discussion's over. We have an unpaused video now. What do you notice all those element symbols have in common? There are several things all those element symbols have in common. The one I care about the most is that all the element symbols start with a capital letter. The element symbols all start with a capital letter. That's important. Anytime you write the symbol of an element, you need to start it with a capital letter. If you don't, it's wrong. Start with a capital letter for your element symbol. And what differences do you notice about the symbols? You may have noticed that some of the element symbols are different from others because they may have different individual letters in there, but probably what you, again, most importantly, hopefully noticed, some elements have one letter symbols other elements, or I should say other element symbols, have two letters. And that brings me to an interesting point that we can add back up here. The ones with two letters, if there's a second letter, the second letter is always lowercase. Always. If there's a second letter, the second letter is lowercase. Again, that is important. If you are writing a two-letter symbol, it starts with a capital, the second one has to be lowercase. If it's not, then you're writing the symbol wrong. And that becomes really important as we talk about the difference between elements and compounds. Compounds are combinations of multiple elements. We abbreviate the combinations of elements together into one compound formula. We've got some examples. Here's a bunch of element symbols versus here's a bunch of compound formulas. What is the difference between an element and a compound? And how do you know from looking at an abbreviation if you are looking at one element or at a compound? I'm going to give you a moment to fill in these sentence stems. An element symbol is different from a compound formula because an element symbol blank, while a compound formula blank. And if you are looking at an abbreviation, you will know it is an element symbol because blank. If it is a compound formula, instead it will blank. I want you to compare and contrast these elements versus these compounds and see if you can fill in these blanks here. Go ahead and pause the video. Okay, when you've unpaused the video and hear me talking again, let's talk about the kinds of answers I was looking for. Now, obviously, word for word, yours might be a little bit different, but in general, what I was hoping you would notice is that an element symbol is different from a compound formula because an element symbol always has only one capital letter, while a compound formula has at least 2 capital letters. Again, notice all of these elements, there was only one capital letter in the element symbol. Whether the symbol was 1 letter long or 2 letters long, there was still only one letter that was capitalized. If there was a second letter, the second letter was lowercase. Whereas for a compound, we've got 2 capital letters at least in each compound formula. Some of them have 3, and as we progress through the year, we're going to find that it is possible for a compound to have more than 3 capital letters and therefore more than 3 elements. And of course, some compounds you still get some lowercase letters when there are symbols that are 2 letters long. Notice what they both have. Both elements and compounds can have these little numbers off to the side. Those are called subscripts, and we're going to talk about those more in another unit. A tiny bit in this unit, but we're going to spend a lot of time talking about subscripts in later units later in the year. So both elements and compounds can have subscripts in their formulas. But if it's an element, there's only one capital letter. If it's a compound, there's at least 2 capital letters, always. So if you are looking at an abbreviation, you will know it's an element symbol because there will only be 1 capital letter. Whereas if it's a compound formula, instead it will have at least 2 capital letters. And when you're done writing that, turn the page to page 12. I've noticed I've said turn the page a couple times, but I'm not really positive if your book pages look like this, or if they look like this, because again, I just have paper. But anyway, let's look at page 12. I want you to check yourself. Write if the symbol is an element, in which case you can just put an E in the blank, or if it's a compound, in which case you could put a C in the blank. So go ahead and there are 46 of them here, but each one should not take you more than like 2 seconds to figure out if it's an element or a compound. So again, take maybe 4 minutes, pause the video, take 4 minutes and fill this out. Pause. Okay, when you unpause the video, I'm sure that if you feel the need to check your answers on that page, Ms. Woodlock would be happy to do that, or you could check with a neighbor. But go ahead and turn to page 13. On page 13, we see some pictures of kind of the same information we were already looking at: atoms, elements, molecules, and compounds. An atom is a single piece of an element that retains the element's properties. Just a single piece. Whereas an element has only one kind of atom, and all elements are found on the periodic table of elements. So here is one element, chlorine, magnesium. Each of these is an individual atom. So in this picture we have 3 atoms, a Cl, an Mg, and another Cl. There are 2 elements, chlorine and magnesium. The whole thing is one molecule, and the whole thing is one compound. Versus over here, an element is a kind of atom. So we have, again, 1, 2, 3, 4 different atoms: helium, oxygen, carbon, another helium. That's 4 different atoms. There's only 3 elements here: helium, oxygen, and carbon. These are 2 different atoms of helium, but they are the same element as each other, so we only have 3 elements. There's 1 molecule and 1 compound, a compound being when you have multiple elements together. Molecules are a combination of 2 or more atoms. Not all molecules are a compound. Here I have 2 atoms of O, but since they're both oxygen, that's only 1 element. This is 1 molecule, but it is not a compound. It is not a compound because it is 2 of the same element. When it's 2 of the same element, that's just an element. It's not a compound. And then again, a compound is any combination of 2 or more different atoms. All compounds have to be molecules. So you can have HOH. This is water, by the way. There are 3 atoms here, an H, an O, and another H. Only 2 elements, hydrogen and oxygen. This is 1 molecule. It is 1 compound. Okay, looking at this bottom section of the page, you've got 5 different problems here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Go ahead and go through each picture, figure out how many atoms there are in the picture, how many elements, how many molecules, and how many compounds. Go ahead and answer these. And this is the last video for the day, and I will hand it over to Miss Woodlock.